I'm sorry, my review is all over the place. Make sure you read all 3 if you want to watch the whole video here. And that's a whole nother topic that has nothing to do with the content of these books. This is such a mess because I literally have no notes and I'm just literally talking by the seat of my pants here. Of course, controversy makes everything interesting. Hello, my name is Andrew. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to discuss this, this trilogy, His Dark Materials trilogy, which was actually on my top 22 books to read in 2022, and I've already read all 3 of these books, and it's only the first week of the year, so I'm doing great, which is awesome. But I just wanted to do a full review for this whole series, kind of share my thoughts. I think I'll start by kind of giving you my opinions on my least favorite book to my favorite book, and maybe as I kind of have to solidify why each one is in the place that it is, that'll make more sense. So, and I actually thought about this the whole read through, because I was watching reviews for the first, second, and the third book kind of as I was reading them. But I'm gonna say for me, my least favorite book was actually book 2, The Subtle Knife. And then my second favorite was probably the third book, The Amber Spyglass. And then my favorite book was The Golden Compass, the first book. So, and I think that's a pretty popular opinion. Most people seem to enjoy the first book the most. I actually listened to all 3 of these on audio, which are all 3 narrated with a full cast. So it was quite an experience and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've given all 3 of these books 4 stars. I would give the whole series 4 stars. I kind of wanted to review this because I want to watch the show, but I wanted to review the books before I've had the show affect my opinions on the books, basically. And I've also never seen the movie. I just remember, so as far as this series, and there's several reasons why I decided I wanted to read it, but I've seen it talked a lot about, and I've seen there's a lot of controversy. In fact, I found this one specific video that talks about all these different controversies that this book had to go through. So if I can find that, I'll link that below. But just when a book has a lot of controversy around it, I'm intrigued and I want to pick it up because I feel controversial things are just interesting to talk about. I don't know. But I remember when this movie came out with Nicole Kidman, I did not go see it. I still haven't seen it. But I just remember my sister told me that there was a lot of heavily anti-religious themes in these books, and but we never saw the movie, so I just didn't know for sure if that was the case. They were popular, but I don't think they were as popular as some other stuff coming out around the same time. And so I just never got around to these. I never read them as a kid. But I have to say, I know that people talk about this, and Philip Pullman, the author of these books, he didn't really have a specific audience in mind. I feel one of the things that's done really well, if you want to consider this a middle grade series, and I feel one of the things about middle grade that makes it a lot more enjoyable for adults to read it is when you write competent adults. So a big reason I wanted to pick these up is because they're described as what some would call steampunk, which I'm not going to attempt to define here. I will either leave a description either on the screen or in my own description, but I love steampunk. My first encounter with steampunk was The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare, and just ever since, that's one of the elements that I absolutely love about The Infernal Devices is the steam punkiness. So, and I think this is one of the more modern specific examples of it. And I feel as someone who has not seen the movie or the show, and I've seen critiques of this, I feel the first book, just the text of the book and the way it's written kind of gives off that vibe. But also all of these books have a sci-fi kind of thing overlaying them, because you're always talking about dark matter and we're talking about parallel universes in each one of these books. And I just really enjoyed book 1 the most, I think, because it was very much a journey, and it was a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It was split up into 3 parts. But I really enjoy all 3 of these books, and I feel I enjoyed all 3 of these titles because, of course, the alethiometer that Lyra has in the first book, and how she can just not magically, but she seems to be able to read it better than anybody else. It was a very good way, I think, to kind of propel the story forward, or to feel like you were constantly being fed knowledge of what was going on. And she would always pose questions to the alethiometer and it would always give her answers. And it never, there's this really annoying thing that certain books will have where a character's about to find an answer, but then it'll be oh no, and then so-and-so interrupted and he didn't find out the answer. And that's just lazy writing. And I don't feel like we had very much of that in any of these 3 books. I feel like anytime a character was posing a question, an answer was given. And I've seen like these critiques that a lot of the dialogue is used to explain a lot of stuff, but I personally don't mind that as a Cassandra Clare fan. I'm sorry, I just have to I have to bring her up in any video because she's just so influential to me in my reading. But as someone who read City of Bones and didn't mind an entire chapter of dialogue, like, to me it was just, I don't mind exposition where the characters are explaining things. And that's another thing I think about this whole series that was so well done is the characters and how they all feel fleshed out and like their own individual people. And like the themes in this series are so interesting. So like book 1, I don't feel like really harps on the anti-religious mindset that much. Like, I don't think you would really notice it unless you were looking really hard for it. But book 2 is extremely on the nose with its theming, as they are literally trying to kill the authority. But also, I can't remember if it's the 3rd book or the 2nd book where they talk about how the authority, I think it's the 3rd book, the authority is actually an angel who just created the universe, but then he becomes this like person who's like actually would view death as like a gift, and that he has existed for so long that he wants like the sweet release of death. And it's just so interesting. But then of course, so in the 2nd book, it's found out that like Lyra has this ability to possibly kill that authority, aka this angel who's existed for all of eternity, sort of. I just can't completely wrap my mind around all these things. But it's just like Mary Malone and Serafina Pekkala, who, oh man, they sure every time they mention Serafina, they always throw in her last name. And the bear, Jorn Bernizak, and the Lord Asriel. Oh my god, I'm so excited to watch this on screen. I feel like I've gotten like kind of the, like, I don't know, I almost feel like I'm gonna enjoy it more as a TV show because I feel like it's just gonna maybe flesh stuff out more. But at the same time, like the books themselves feel like just so well written, and I feel like, again, like there's no lazy writing here. Like, and there's so much. Okay, in the first book opening, I'm sorry, my review is all over the place and it's all over all 3 books, so make sure you read all 3 if you want to watch the whole video here. The first book opening with Lyra witnessing somebody trying to poison Lord Asriel was so fascinating. And then as the books progress, you find out in the 2nd book that Lord Asriel is trying to kill basically God in this universe. But then in the 3rd book, you find out that the Magisterium has discovered that Lyra has this ability. So then they want to take it upon themselves to kill her. It's a very interesting conversation that makes you think about, like, okay, if we know this person has the potential to do this thing, what then becomes our responsibility? Is it our responsibility to get rid of this threat? But at the same time, can we get, like, the person hasn't done anything yet, which is an actual very common conversation with people that are just talking about crime in general, when they're like, oh, this person is like walking by my door and being suspicious. And it's like, well, we can't do anything about that person unless something actually happens. And then the person who feels uncomfortable is like, but you're not going to do anything until something actually happens. And it's just like, but you can't really punish them for something they haven't committed yet. Or like the crime, there hasn't been a crime. Like the person is just being suspicious. So that's an interesting parallel, of course, but just leads to a whole conversation about like the potential for people versus like what they've actually done, and, you know, crime and punishment, and does the punishment fit the crime? And that's a whole conversation. And I just find that whole aspect of like the church, it's very clear, especially in books 2 and 3, that Philip Pullman is not a fan of organized religion. And I've read some interviews, I've seen some things, like he specifically wrote these books in order to undermine Christian beliefs. I just feel like it's Philip Pullman has some balls. Like he has some balls, because to write this, and it's shocking to me that this series isn't higher up on a banned book list, and just discussing like what these books are about and how like in certain countries like these aren't allowed and people can't even discuss these themes and these ideas. Like, it's just crazy to think that these are just like banning books at all. That's a whole nother conversation. And I went into like a rabbit hole with these books when I talked, and then I was looking up like lists of like banned books, and it just makes me want to read them even more, because like access to knowledge or access to a person's thoughts and ideas, just access to these things is such a valuable thing. But also like, as a person who used to be a religious person, I just find it so, like, when I was a religious person, like, it's kind of encouraged for you to question your faith. Like, you should be encouraged to read things and open your mind to the possibilities that what you believe isn't true, and that it should make your faith stronger, because you can then, this feels very personal. I just find what this series set out to do is so fascinating, because like, they were written in a time that's just so heavily, I mean, it's still, I think the whole world is still a very Christian kind of world for the most part. So to write these books and to publish these books with such an anti-Christian message, like, and for them to not be the #1 most banned books of the decades that they came out, is just shocking to me. And that's a whole nother topic that has nothing to do with the content of these books, because the content, well, in a way, because the thing is, like, of course, in the first book we talk about dust and how it's like this physical manifestation of the original sin. And like, in that video that I have linked below, like, I'm still not sure if my copy of the book had this in it or not, but they're supposedly they wanted to ban the third book because it had verbiage about sexual content or something like that, and they didn't want that in this type of audience for a book. But then again, Philip Pullman says he didn't write this with an intended audience or intended age. And there's one of my favorite quotes in the first book about how it says, like, it's the, again, I'll try to put it on the screen, but something about like, the duty of the old is to worry about the young, and it's the young's duty to like not worry about I'll put it on the screen because I know I'm getting it wrong. But when I heard that, I was like, okay, I'm sensing a theme here. I feel like these books are so theme driven. Like, they're so focused on just like this, like, and he said in some of his interviews, like, he wrote these to show that it does not matter like who you are or what type of person you are. If you get into these positions of power, then you will become corrupt, because this person who is in the third book, I want to say the priest, I don't remember the name of the priest, but I just remember I did love a lot of these adult characters. Like, a lot of the adult characters kind of have my heart. And the polar bear, Joran Bernizik, I cannot even remember. I'm pretty sure that's right. The polar bear was great. He was like, but Lee Scoresby, and that was his name, right? See, they all had kind of weird names, but I'm pretty sure that's the guy who Lin-Manuel Miranda plays. Lord Asriel was trash, and Miss Coulter was trash. But let me tell you, I was so surprised when it was like revealed that she was also Lyra's mom. See, like, book 1 had so many things that I love, like, just turning things on its head. Like, you find out that Asriel's going to be poisoned by his servant, and then like, but then you see that conversation where they're like, oh no, we don't know if what we've done is the right thing or not. And it kind of like just takes this whole message of like, okay, well, should he have been poisoned because what he's doing is so evil or not? And it's just, I also just think one of the really cool things about the first book is like this idea of something from this fantasy world like stepping into your own world is just so neat and so cool. And I think like the ending to the first book, having that in it is just, it's just so cool. Okay, let's talk about the first book though also, because also in part 3 of the first book, we have so many things happen. We have like the polar bears fighting, and we have, again, there's just all of this like not knowing what the truth is kind of happening here, and not knowing if like Lyra is lying, or if she's also, something that was so fascinating throughout the whole first book was this idea and this concept of Lyra is destined for this thing, but we can't inform her of what the thing is. It's such a good way to grip your reader and have your reader want to know. But as you're reading the book, you're getting these little answers through the alethiometer, and you're just like, okay, why is she so special? And it makes sense why you're following her and why she's the lead character, because there's this sort of prophecy about her. So it just makes sense that she would be the person that is the most interesting. This is such a mess because I literally have no notes, and I'm just literally talking by the seat of my pants here. But let's also talk about how oh my god, I haven't even talked about the demons the animal companions. Also, that was so cool, and how they show like your emotions and like they're a part of you. And then in the third, see, this is why the third book was is my second favorite, because that scene where they go in the land of the dead and and Lyra has to be separated from her demon, and that was like so emotional, and it was difficult. Like it was like you knew that it was because it's this thing that's like part of you and she has to sever it. And then in the land of the dead, when Will and Lyra are going in there, and then he has to like forget about his mom so that he can help his dad, and these books were good. They were so good, and like it was good. That's a boring review, isn't it? Well, I think also that like book 3 is my second favorite, because books 1 and book 2 are the majority. Sorry, books 1 and books 3 are the majority of the story. Like book 3 is like so long compared to books 1 and 2. It's 100 and my versions of them. The third book is like 120 pages longer than the first book. But at the same time, I think the first book is the best one, because it's the perfect like length, and it has a beginning, middle, and an end, versus like the third book feels a lot more kind of meandering a little bit, and the second book feels like I just feel like the second book, it was just like, okay, we need to get the knife, and that was like kind of the only real thing. And then we found out the source of the alethiometer and like what is causing it. So like the second book is still a good book because it still reveals, and you find out that like they're trying to kill the authority, so, or that's what maybe Lyra's destined for. So again, you do get answers. So it's not like, I don't think it's really, I think if you're gonna say book 2 syndrome, like I don't think that's really a thing here, because I feel like it very much feels like it is doing the work to bridge the gap between the first and the third, while still moving along certain plot points in the second book. But the third book, you just have so much more to the story because it's just a longer book. But the first book, in my opinion, like I feel like this third book could have been shorter. It could have been the length of the first book, and I think it would have been a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, it was still a great book. Also, I'm pretty sure it's the third book when you're first introduced to this concept of like Metatron and him being like the Lord's prophet and just like all this stuff. Like there's so many themes in all 3 of these books that I'm familiar with, just like being raised in a religious household. And like, I think my one also like not disappointing, I just feel like by the third book, or in this third book, it's heavily the romance between Will and Lyra, which like I'm not against. Like listen, if you have read a Cassandra Clare book, like romance is a very heavy aspect to all of her books. But here it just felt kind of quick, or just dramatic for what was happening. Like by the end of this third book, they're saying that they love each other and that like they can't be without each other. And it's just kind of like, haven't talked to each other for like 2 weeks. Like it just it's not, like my favorite romances in Cassandra Clare's books. Sorry to compare everything to her, but it's just those romances have a lot of time to develop, and I feel like you see a lot more of the characters together. And then just here, don't get me wrong, I'm not against them together. I think them together makes sense. I just think that it was very fast and very over the top considering what they've been through. Now, I know they've been through a lot, and that them thinking very highly of each other feels realistic to me. But by the end of this book, for them to be in love is just a little, I don't know, like I just could have, and don't get me wrong, okay, I know insta love happens, and I can be sold on insta love sometimes because it looks Strange the Dreamer, okay, but just the way it's done in Strange the Dreamer, it makes sense to me, like how quickly it happens. And here it just didn't really feel as earned, I guess. But at the same time, like I do like them together, and I do feel like the ending with like how it was such a tragic, bittersweet ending, with the fact that like Lyra and Will had to decide between like having her demon in her own world or going into that world with Will. But then if she went with Will, then she couldn't be there. She could only be there for like 10 years and they knew that was the case because Will's dad had been living in a different world, but he was like aging at a faster rate or something, so they had to be in their own world, so they couldn't be together. Like, don't get me wrong, like that is my kind of that's my kind of shit. Okay, like, I live for characters who can't be together and are constantly pining for each other. Like, yes. So I kind of wish we'd like seen more of that, I guess, or just like, I don't know, I just didn't feel, and I could, upon a reread of this series, like maybe it was there and I just didn't see it. I'm very, very happy that I have read this series, and I definitely will be watching the HBO television show. Absolutely. So what else do I want to say about this? The third book and them going to the land of the dead, like and the suburbs of the dead, like it had to put it, like that's one of my favorite things to happen in any book is when people go to the underworld. It's going to be at least a 4-star book just from that alone. So, but I enjoyed all 3 of these books. Like the first one, still probably my favorite, but I really enjoyed the second and the third book. Like I don't think that they decrease that much in enjoyment. Like there are some series where the first book is so good and the second book is just nowhere near as good. And like, in my opinion, like they all are about a 4-star range here for me. Like maybe the first book is like a 4.5 and the other 2 are like a 4-star. So I still think it's a great series and I definitely think it's worth a read. But of course I've spoiled a lot of stuff, so I'm sure you've already read it if you're here. Oh my gosh, and I have to mention this. Like, I think that, again, there was so much plot in the first book, and like just her just on all these adventures. Like, this first book just feels like such a good adventure story because she's like starting off at the school, but then she gets whisked away to like be with Miss Coulter, and like she's talking to her all about like the different things that she can do for education, and then she's talking about how then she gets whisked away to the Egyptians because of that. So she's at that party, and then they're all discussing like the gobblers and how the gobblers are stealing children. And then you find out that like the children have these demons, but the demons are getting sliced open or sliced off of them, which like, why are they doing that? But then Miss Coulter like finds Lyra and like stops it from happening to her, but she didn't stop it from happening to the other kids. So like, what the hell? And then like she's trying to find her friend Roger, which again, that comes back into play in the third book. Like it's a relevant point to the story. Like it wasn't just done to, like it felt like it was brought up for a reason. And like I loved this first book, honestly. Like it was really good. And I just think that like this felt like so well written. Like it was so well written in the sense of like there was no lazy writing, which I already said this, but like the alethiometer and like the knife, like all of these titles make sense. All of like the characters' motivations make sense. All of the themes make sense. Like just, I think these are very well written books. And of course, controversy makes everything interesting. So I wanted to read them. And like, I just feel like after reading this series too, I feel so lucky to live in a place where no one is preventing me from reading this series and like being able to read it and take away my own interpretation of it. Like nothing is preventing me from interpreting this text however I see necessary, and that is just such a wonderful thing to be able to experience. Like, you know what I mean? Like obviously you can read or not read whatever you want, but like being able to say that I live in a place where no one can prevent me from reading this book is just magnificent. Okay, just one more thing I want to point about the third book, which again, it's my second favorite, so I definitely, for sure, I'm pretty solid in my opinions here that I think the first book is the best, or the second book was my third favorite, and the third book, I would rank them book 1, book 3, book 2, because again, and we have like, but again, book 2 packs such a punch because you meet this character who I'm pretty sure in book 1, Lee's going to be says that like if Lyra had been his daughter, he would have treated her with respect and he would have like been so proud to have her as a daughter. And then in book 2, he dies. So it just packs a punch. It does pack a punch. So don't get me wrong, book 2 is still great. But also in book 3, when we find out that the magisterium or the council, I cannot remember the word, but in book 3 we find out that they want to kill her, and the way they've done that is they've like taken a strand of her hair, but then like Will has to use the knife to like open up a world, and then he throws all of Lyra's hair into that other world, and then it goes off, and that leaves like, it's just so well done. It's just so well done. And I really enjoyed this series, and I am going to keep it on my shelves, and that's all really. So if you have read this series, I would love to hear your ranking of like favorite to least favorite book, and if you have any additional opinions on the series, like love to hear it, would love to hear it. If you know any other great steampunk series, I would also love to hear it, and I will leave my Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter all in the description here as well, so feel free to check those out, and just anything you want to let me know in the comments, feel free to just go ham. Have a great day. Bye.